Hello, this is Aaron Eggman with Character Formation Coaching, a Christian mind-body transformational coaching technique. We're in a series called Catalyze, or Catalyze Character Formation Coaching, and we're on session 3, the ideal growing environment. First, I wanted to do a review, so go ahead and pause your video and see if you can get the answers to all this. What's our mandate, our goal, our mission? What change model am I presenting? And then what is root? Today we're going to be going over soil. But here we go. The mandate is for us as believers to make disciples. The goal is to grow more and more like Christ, or discipleship, or the goal of discipleship is to be more and more like Christ. The mission is to be to transform. The change model that I've been teaching in these 12 sessions is what I call kingdom family. The root of negative fruit is disconnection and aloneness, and the soil is something I'm going to be going over today, I went over that. Yeah, I'm going to be going over that today, grace, truth, and time. All right, so let's talk about a verse. Luke 13, 6-9. Then he told this parable. A man had a fig tree growing in his vineyard, and he went over to look for fruit on it, but did not find any. So he said to the man who took care of the vineyard, "For 3 years now, I've been coming to look for fruit on this fig tree and haven't found any. Cut it down. Why should I use it to soil?" "Sir," the man replied, "leave it alone for 1 more year, and I'll dig around it and fertilize it. If it bears fruit next year, fine. If not, then cut it down." So when we were, the interpretation in scriptures talks about the gardener being Jesus. And so it's like Jesus is saying, no, don't cut this tree down yet. Let's give it 1 more year, dig around the tree, fertilize it, and then see if the fruit changes. So this is a really cool verse because it really sets up where we need to change the soil ingredients. And as we change the soil ingredients, then the fruit will change. So we can't just try to counteractively command fruit to change, or command our badness out, or just simply try to do differently or think differently when there's still a root. The tree is still the tree. And so the best way to have fruit grow big and strong is to have a good growing environment. And so what is the ideal growing environment for? This is from Dr. John Townsend. And this is the competence and character growth path. And so when we've been talking about fruit, our fruit is our personal, people, or performance aspects of our life. So if we have personal issues, that's a fruit issue. If we have relational issues, that's a people issue. If we have, performance issues at work, or if we have, I know in my own life, there was a time when I just really didn't want to do anything around the house, as I saw that was a female. In my upbringing, it was a woman's role. And so in my marriage, that didn't work very well. That would be a performance issue when I was expecting, my wife to do all the chores around the house. And so I was, my wife was frustrated with my performance of taking care of household issues, household chores, that kind of stuff. And so, so that's the fruit. And we can't just simply change the behaviors when it's a deep-seated issue. To get a deep-seated issue, we really need to change the soil ingredients, and then changing, being in good soil, an ideal growing environment, will then change the character, and we'll talk more about character coming up. But today we're talking about the soil, and the ideal growing environment to address the root of disconnection and aloneness is grace, truth, and time. And so let's talk about grace. What is grace, and how does it help with enacting transformation? So grace cannot be earned and is not deserved. Grace welcomes and accepts weaknesses into relationship. This is a big one Often we think of kind of grace as something nebulous, kind of out there, something that's hard to wrap our minds around. But I'm wanting to present grace in a very felt way, in a way that we can understand it and know what it would do. And so think about Jesus like pursuing the hurting and the vulnerable. Like Jesus always went after the lost sheep. He left the 99 and went after the one. There's so many different, there's the lost coin. He went after the coin. He searched and searched and searched until he found the lost coin. And so, if you think about the woman at the well, it's like he went and revealed himself to the woman at the well. All the different miracles are of the vulnerable, and lots of Old Testament scriptures talks about his heart for the vulnerable. And so when I'm talking about grace, I want you to think of an active pursuit of weakness or of vulnerability or of the negative realities. Grace pursues, it seeks out, it welcomes, it accepts, it goes after the weak aspects of who we are, and it brings them into an encounter with grace. And so grace, an encounter with grace, is a felt experiential encounter of unconditional love and acceptance that transforms. So let's use a story of the woman at the well. So the woman at the well had many husbands, right? I think 5 husbands, and the one that she had right at that time was not her husband. Well, Jesus, in order to to pursue the part of the woman who felt so much shame, he needed to talk about it. And so he actually talked to her and says, I see that, go and call your husband. And she said, no, I don't have a husband. And then he says, you're right when you say you don't have a husband. You have 5, and the one that you're with right now, it's not your husband. So you can think about just how he he pursued that shame. Obviously, that statement will bring out the way that she feels. Think about the self-disgust she might have at that. But when she saw him saying just the brutal reality, the brutal honesty of exactly where she was at, and yet she was able to look into his eyes and see love and acceptance. And even with, her as an adulteress, like he saw her, he knew she was sleeping with, that man who wasn't her husband, and she saw it in his eyes that he still loved and accepted her. It's a very felt encounter with that. That's such a perfect example of grace. There is or another example that comes to my mind is Peter, when Peter had denied Christ. Well, Jesus didn't just drop it and never talk about it again. Like he actually, brought Peter into an encounter with grace where he'd asked him the question, Peter, do you love me? And he asked it 3 times. And think about, this is just after Peter had not denied Christ. He died, rose again. This was his appearing, I think, is a second appearing to Peter and the disciples, and like he really went after Peter and saying, Peter, do you love me? And he's like, Lord, I love you. And he asked him again, Peter, do you love me? And I really see that as him saying, Peter, I know you denied me, and I love you. Peter, I know you denied me, and I love you. Like he didn't shrink away from talking or bringing that topic up or bringing that shame associated with his denial up. Can think about how shameful that would be, and Jesus brought that shame into relationship. He pursued Peter's weakness. He had denied Christ, and then Jesus pursued that part of Peter, and then brought it again, welcomes and accepts, goes after, but then 2, brings it into a felt experiential encounter of unconditional love and acceptance that transforms. And this is both verbal and nonverbal. It's in the eyes, it's in the stance, it's the way we feel towards a person. And then another very important aspect of grace is that grace are resources that originate outside of yourself and that empower you to change. There's a whole bunch of verses about grace building you up and helping you to, say no to ungodliness. So there's a bunch of different scriptures that talk about how grace empowers you for a change. And again, it's like resources that you do not possess in and of yourself. They have to come from the outside. So all of these are different aspects of grace, and all of these need to be understood and known. And so how does that affect us, and what does that matter? Well, it matters when we get in touch with a vulnerability or a weakness inside of ourselves, or when we're dealing with an emotion, maybe if we just say a negative emotion, or it's like if that comes up inside of us, like how do we treat our weakness or our vulnerability? Do we try to make it go away, or try to just change it right away, or do we offer that part of us grace? Do we see that part of us as unbearably alone and in desperate need of encounter with grace? Because if we see it like that, if we see our vulnerabilities with the eyes of grace, then we're active in our pursuit, in our love, towards the parts of us that are, weak and are vulnerable. And we then give it an encounter with unconditional love and acceptance, which then helps us to internalize new resources that we didn't have to start with. We internalized it from the outside. And so this is a really cool verse where it says, each of you should use whatever gift you have received to serve others as faithful stewards of God's grace in its various forms. So we are stewards of the grace of God, meaning that we offer, use whatever grace gift that you have and use it to serve and to love others. And so, yeah, grace, we offer grace to one another. So that means, if someone comes to me and they share, hey, I'm really hurting in my relationship with my wife, I don't try to make that hurting go away. As a steward of God's grace, I'm thinking, this person's in a lot of pain. And so what do? I go towards this pain. Yeah, you're in a lot of pain, and just let him go towards it. I offer him a safe place to go after that pain, which is exactly where he's at. If he's having pain in his marriage, there's a lot on that. And so I get curious, open, accepting, and loving, understanding that if I understood where that pain was coming from, that it would make sense. And I verbally and non-verbally go towards the pain, not away, not really quickly trying to just get him, to say, hey, can I pray with you, brother? Because that doesn't really let him go deeper. Like, we don't even know, like, praying is good, but praying before we understand what's going on, that doesn't make sense. He hasn't even been able to share the pain yet. Or trying to say, try to cheer him up or something like that. Like, that doesn't help. Grace goes after the pain and sits with it. And in, an experience of acceptance right where they're at, they internalize you and have, it's like your love, your care, your voice inside. Because a lot of people have harsh critical judges. And the only way to change that, even according to science, is to encounter relationships that aren't that offer grace, and soft voices. That's what changes and helps us to internalize what the resources that we need. So what is truth, and why is it important to enacting transformation? Truth is what's factual, what's real, what's reality-based. It reveals what's right, what's wrong, what's good, what's evil, based on scriptures. Scriptures is our dividing line. And then this is the point that I think is really helpful, especially when it comes to transformation. Well, of course, knowing what's right and wrong is also very much part of it, because how do we know what's wrong or what we should feel if we don't know what's right, what's wrong? And so both that and then brutal honesty of reality, like not trying to hide from where we're at, or trying trying to make it so that we never think that we think certain thoughts. Like when we sometimes we use scriptures in a way where it's like we don't even allow ourselves to have negative thoughts, and we think that's health. And so we might go set, I know in my own life when I came to Christ, I went through a whole lot of trauma growing up, but what I decided to do is never let a bad thought or a negative thought or a negative reality into my mind, thinking that that was what was called renewing your mind and all of that. Well, my wife then experienced me very differently than I experienced myself, because I didn't think I had any of that negative stuff. But my wife experienced the negatives, but I was just out of touch with it. So brutal honesty is allowing the thoughts, allowing the emotions, allowing the negative to be, because it's there and other people experience it. You're just now becoming aware of exactly where you're at. And so brutal honesty of reality, or gut level honesty, is very vital and very important when it comes to being able to enact change. Because if we're not allowed to feel a certain way, or if we're not allowed to have, say, the emotion of anger or the emotion of fear, we'll never be able to transform what's actually coming up inside of us. Instead, we'll hide from it. And so there's different environments. So I'm going to start with high grace, low truth. So in this kind of environment, it's like everything is seen as like, it's like no matter what you do, there's no good, or there's no right, or there's no wrong. It's really relative. And so in a relative environment, each person has to do what's best in their own eyes. And doing what's best in your own eyes might not lead to the best fruit, because we can think we're doing what's right, but without knowing what's right and what's wrong, we're not, we'll still be experiencing consequences. And this is a lot of what happens in like the secular world. The secular world is getting really good at offering high grace. Some of the best, I know I've learned a whole bunch from the secular world. They've really, really, really been working on this to, I mean, think about like, say, the Black Lives Matter movement. Like, what an amazing, the secular world is doing such an amazing job, especially like if we just kind of bring in politics, like the liberal individuals are doing such a good job of offering such grace to people right where they're at. And so, or you can bring it in a whole bunch of different ways, but even like different non-Christian psychotherapies, they do such a good job of welcoming people exactly where they're at. But it's also very important to bring in the other aspect of it, which is truth. Because if you have low truth, then it's like we just do what's best in our own eyes. And so we can come to the wrong conclusions, but we think they're right. And because it's not based on right or based on truth, we're going to be experiencing the negatives associated with that. So only in an environment of high grace, high truth, are we able to get to the right, come to the right solution. And then we have high truth, low grace. And this kind of environment is very harsh. And it's like, we really internalize like a harsh critical judge, like inside in this kind of environment. We try to use that voice it's very much like the law. We're always trying to perform, and we're never living up to the right standard, or we're always trying, like it's based on what we do, that we feel our worth or our value. And so it's very important. So here's the environment that we want to go for. It's a high grace and high truth environment. In this style environment, there's brutal honesty with no condemnation, no matter what we find. That kind of, once we've come to Christ, there is no condemnation for those of us that believe in Christ Jesus. And with that no condemnation stance, it's okay. It's like exactly where different aspects of ourself is. If we have a dark fantasy, like we can go towards it and be like, God, here's what I'm thinking. Like, this is where I'm at, rather than saying, oh my gosh, I'm a Christian, I'm not allowed to think that. Again, because there's always like sin darkens. our thoughts, our emotions, our fantasies. And so because sin is in the world, there are going to be dark aspects of our thoughts or of our emotions or of our memories or images that come up inside of us. And so in order for the darkness that sin is causing, we need to be able to be okay with where we're at and just not back away from it and just admit, okay, so this was my thought, right where it's at. It gives us safety to be able to explore all weaknesses. Where also we have the ability to internalize resources that we don't currently possess, because willpowering change all the time, that means you're limited to one brain. You're limited to the resources that you currently have. So if you always are trying to use willpower to change yourself, create insanity is trying to do the same thing but get different results. And when you only have the same resources that you had before and then trying to do the same thing that you just failed, that doesn't help. So willpowering your way out does not work in deep-seated issues. Deep-seated issues, you're going to need resources that are outside of you. And that's where because that's what we need. We need grace. And so, high grace, high truth allows us to welcome and accept all aspects of what we find inside. It gives us safety to explore, and then we can face and feel in reality. And this brings a chart that I'm going to be going over in the coming weeks. But high grace, high truth in state 1 helps us to go from welcoming and accepting into facing and feeling reality in relationships. And because when we have an encounter with grace, we shift into this connected state, and in the connected state is when we're connected to God, people, and our spirit-led self, and our spirit rules over our is in control, and we live according to the spirit. And when we live according to the spirit, we experience spirit-led transformation. And so this high grace, high truth, both what we offer other people, but also what we offer ourselves. So our internal voice that we offer ourselves will dictate whether or not we're able to get connected, or if we stay in the disconnected state. All right, thanks for joining me, and I hope today's lesson was helpful. What the takeaway that I really want you to take away is how do I welcome and accept my vulnerabilities into relationship with God, people, and even allowing myself to see my negative realities. And when I do see negative realities about myself, do I bring it into relationship? And am I okay with it, just exactly where I'm at? And do I receive encounters with grace in which I then shift and am able to have spirit-led transformation? So I leave you with that, and I hope it's helpful.